piece of work is just called Love in Uganda, and this piece emerged in, I made in January as a starting point. Basically, it was basically a reflection on what was happening a lot in the news at the moment in this, but it was more a reflection of what had happened over the last sort of 4 months prior, to do with this whole emergence of the anti-homosexual bill, which is currently trying to be, or had been currently trying to be passed in Uganda, and suddenly emerged. And basically, a bill had been proposed by one single Ugandan parliamentarian at the end of the summer, essentially attempting to bring back the death penalty for gays and lesbians and trans and LGBT people. And this bill, although sort of essentially seemingly coming out of the blue, is part of a huge wave of increased homophobic action and laws, particularly arising in East African countries and ex-British colonial colonies of Africa. And this bill has pretty much been completely sponsored by the American right wing in America, by particularly this group of Fowler, which is a very renowned right-wing think tank, which is completely, since the election of Barack Obama, particularly in America, has put a lot of investment in actually turning their attention to Africa and whipping up, increasingly fundamental law, opinion, particularly abortion and this kind of homophobia and homophobic law. And they are basically sponsoring a lot of African MPs to sort of carry out extremist laws. And this law in Uganda has incredible support, basically, and was seemingly, that had almost seemingly complete approval. And it took very long, really, to get into the international press. It took about 2 months before any international government really made a stance against it. And it's quite shockingly so, I think, with gay rights especially, that it's unbelievable how long it takes for stuff to actually be recognised in the media and governmentally. And finally, there was government action, said that Hillary Clinton and George and Gordon Brown did make a stance, but still, it's still the instance that you only have countries like Sweden, it was only Sweden who said that they would impose economic sanctions. But underlying all this as a problematic was this thing of the religious relationship with how it was going about, and particularly that the Anglican Church, which essentially has more support, has more of a population in Uganda, in East African countries, have more of a population of affiliated within evangelical groups. But the Anglican Church as an institution refuses to neither completely condemn or support this whole issue of homosexuality. And in particular, a lot of British and Anglican churches are assigned with Ugandan communities and churches, but yet it took a very long time for the church to even make an official comment on it. And it wasn't until December that Rowan Williams, the head of the church, made a direct just response, even condemning the bill essentially, but neither kind of completely being able to completely sort of say this is such a thing against homosexuality should never be said, or that we to embrace it. So I was thinking, or very concerned with this relationship essentially, and and in my work I deal with this whole process of essentially what it is as a single person to kind of work as an activist, or kind of the language in which change can happen, or that something can be said, and when should something be said, and what is gradually more with music. I'm a musician and I have a musical training, but I work a lot with the kind of process of music as a collective means to say something as a way of political, social change. And I was particularly interested in the relationship between music and contemporary issues regarding the church. Essentially, the church only sings something which is historicised or has a certain set possibility and means. So, based on very traditional church music and psalms, I wrote a piece of music for 16 voices entitled Love in Uganda, which has a very simple text, which is Love in Uganda, help, help, love in Uganda, what does it mean to us? Help, help, love in Uganda, what will it destroy? Love in Uganda, help, help, where can it go? And it repeats itself, but finally just says, we must protect all love. So kind of ambiguous as well, this relationship between help and a stance, but it would be very specific. And I sent this piece of music with a very simple letter as an anonymous person, asking I sent it to every single canon presenter, who is the one person in a cathedral who decides what is essentially said and sung in the church. So I sent it this letter and piece of music, which sort of says this piece of music can be sung in any space, on the street, on the TV, in public or private space, but can be performed in your sacred walls. For if there is a belief in an Almighty God, surely that Almighty God is always listening. So just sort of kind of playing again with that notion of music and relationship to an altar thing, and also how that relates to space, because I work a lot with kind of music and context and the relationship of the importance of context, as well as what you said, where the means and actions should take place. And yeah, I sent this to every single cathedral in England and also in all the colonies, so from the Falkland Islands to Gibraltar, and with a simple request of this piece of music being sung. And I only got 15 responses, and ranging from kind of that they had no time, or they regretfully couldn't do it, or they didn't have a choir, to the extent, or the other extreme of some of the Falkland Islands saying such words in a contemporary sense couldn't be performed. It couldn't be performed as it didn't actually allude to it didn't actually mention liturgical language. So, but as part of this piece of work was invited to be part of this exhibition in Amsterdam, and I repeated the same system in which this piece of music was sent to all the Anglican churches in Amsterdam, and similarly none of them agreed for it to be performed, but we did perform it in the gallery there. And then it was also performed with Victor de Wits in Rotterdam, and it was actually performed for the first time in the church there, and then now it is in Sheffield, and the same process has been. I've sent this piece of music to every single Anglican church here, and I've had 3 responses, and there's actually one who is now working out if this can be performed. But the notice board basically just is a parody on that note on a church notice board, so it's sort of using the language of that as an admiring work. I kind of in the kind of play on activism, we're much more interested in trying to get away from the traditional roles of activist culture, the notice board is just announcing the different performances are going to take place during the city during the 2 months. It also includes 3 abstract numbers, which one is the mobile phone number of the Ugandan minister who is behind the bill, which you can actually find online on the internet, and then the Church of England's direct office, and then also a gay helpline in Belgium. So they are just abstract numbers, which again allude to this difference of a collective force and then a kind of individual force of just saying something and picking up the phone and the responsibility of doing that. But also that it again works in a kind of neutral sense. I send it as a neutral person almost, and so I'm quite interested in this form of taking away political background or stigma. So those numbers are abstract, so if you were to call them, it would start with a simple gesture of saying, who is this, or what is your name? But yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
And we hope that we'll get time. The last few years I've been working a lot in rural areas of Scotland, China and Japan, exploring a lot with photography, the sort of mythology connected to the landscape and the relationship between small communities and nature. And working then also with local songs as a way of preserving a lot of the traditions and stories and actual dialects within these regions. So in China I was working in Yunnan, where there's many minorities, and working with their love songs which have kind of disappeared from the culture but relate very much to the landscape. And it led me to a small island in Japan near Okinawa, which again is it's rich in its belief system. It's very shamanistic, but it also has other histories coming in. Sort of during the wartime, the Americans, there's Christianity as well as Buddhism coming in. But the land itself has lots of shamanistic and older belief systems with god mountains and god rocks being identified or sort of discussed about which one actually was the origin of where the gods came down. So I set about travelling through the island, trying to record through photography in a very traditional medium format style, something of this power of the land. It's densely packed with vegetation and has these poisonous snakes there, so it seems very intimidating. During this stay, I was crudely awoken in the morning with jet lag with these tunes playing and didn't know where they originated from. And I discovered this whole system of tannoy speakers within the villages there, which go off at set times in the day. So there's a morning wake-up tune, a tune at lunchtime, and then later in the evening, around 5 o'clock, and maybe also later ones in the evening. And it turned out as I travelled around the island, these tunes would go off at slightly different times and with different tunes. And I became very fascinated, what is this? Who is controlling this? In a very beautiful, magical place, subtropical vegetation, and yet there's this sort of manipulation going on, and it was disturbing and seductive at the same time. And I started doing research, trying to ask people questions about this, but people didn't actually really know, and I got sort of fragments of ideas. So I decided after some time to go back to really investigate it more fully in a sort of quite academic way, and make appointments with different town's head people who are on the road. Actually, each village has a town headman, and it rotates every few years, and it might be the local barber or the local shrimp farmer or whatever. So it's a very nice sort of adventure trying to find the key person in each place. And I discovered that the system of tannoys was originally a natural disaster prevention system, which was introduced after the war, and used to just be a very crude siren that would be used at these times, at say 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 5 o'clock, as a way of testing the system, but also became a functional device for the communities, as a way to remind them when it's lunchtime or when the children should go home. Because the population is actually a very aging population, and then there are some young kids, and they're very remote communities, self-sufficient more or less. So people are farming out in the fields, or very, very basic living, but very detached, small communities, and it's become a very functional thing for them rather than a manipulating thing. But as an outsider, I was very interested in and how these things related. And so originally it used to be a very crude siren, and then in the late 50s, actually a local man who ran a music shop decided he wanted to build on the top of the mountain this big music box to introduce the tunes as a nicer way of signifying the times. So using actually a lot of his own money and very little from the government, they built this construction and had things like Brahms, lullaby, and various things, very westernized music, but perhaps with a Japanese version layered on. And that sort of started to be adapted by other regions of the island too, and so you get these different tunes playing and also slightly different schedules according to their needs and desires. And despite it having this sort of background manipulation, it really is functioning for these people. They're very attached to it. They don't want it to change. They do rely on it in many ways. And so it was very interesting on the last visit this spring to spend real time there and understand how it's used by them. There also are announcements for dental checkups, for remembering to turn the gas off after lunch and after dinner. And in some communities they have a morning exercise session at 6:30, and it's a Japanese sort of exercise routine that apparently everyone in Japan knows. And all the kiddies will come down outside the building and they'll all do this little routine following a couple of elderly people. And then in the evenings, some school children will take turns reading stories through the town too. So it's a way of practicing their reading skills, but also they're reading a bedtime story to their community, which I found very endearing. And how much I would have hated it as a child, but they really embraced it, and it really identified each community and really pulled them together. And I think particularly at a time now where it's a very fragile situation with many families departing to the mainland because they have to for education and for jobs. It's very hard to survive there. So it's dwindling as many empty homes, but there are a few families beginning to come back because they're interested in another way of life than we have on the mainland. But this is really helping them, these communities of predominantly old ladies in one place who are farming, but really this pulls them together. It gives them a structure that it helps them continue, and it's interesting to, I think, also to relate it then to what is happening also in our communities. These discussions about living longer and so how are we actually going to get treated in the future? Are there things we can adapt that pull our communities together again? I think that's one of the things I find really touching about visiting these remote places where they're hanging on to something very old, but actually we can learn a lot from it. Getting back to the photography and the sound I have here, and I'm sort of interested actually at this stage, because the project is still ongoing, about just sort of trying to find again the strange moment I had on my first few nights on this island of being in this place, and yet with these very bizarre tunes, and what kind of magical space this creates also in your own imagination.
I think it's really interesting that your first assumption about it is that it's a really manipulative function and very kind of controlling.
Well, you really feel you're being watched.
But then obviously the more you describe it, now people have actually taken ownership of it, and that's actually engendered a different kind of community. It's really interesting that it's been kind of co-opted in that way. Really.
Is there any reason why you use stills as opposed to a multimedia? So you could mix with the sound and movement of images?
Yeah, I actually like to distill it quite a lot. I mean, I find that there's so much there you can, sort of more meditative, you can really kind of slow down and absorb it. And I think we're so used to also, with the colour, photography, the video, it's too easy for me. I'm quite a traditionalist, a bit old-fashioned. I like it. I like that quietness.
It was all the mix of the sound and images. It said to be better doing it that way. That's all my opinion.
people have asked me the same thing. Yeah, for me, I sense that in the work. Yeah. At this time, this is what I